Welcome to this Risk Coalition Risk Officer Sustainability Forum panel discussion. We really do need to come up with a better name than that, because that's really tricky to say first thing. Well, it's not first thing in the morning, but it doesn't trip off the tongue. I'm just very quickly going to put some slides up, and then we'll get into the discussion. Please, those people that have joined us, or we would like to make this an interactive discussion as much as possible. So please do raise questions in the chat, and put your hand up if you'd like to contribute, and we will try to bring you in without interrupting the flow of the discussion too much. So the topic of today's discussion is embedding ESG considerations into decision making. And with us today, we have three brave volunteers, one of which was more volunteered than the others. So we have Barry Murphy, who's Head of Enterprise Risk and Deputy CRO at the British Business Bank. Barry, so British Business Bank is actually the UK government's economic development bank. He's been with British Business Bank since 2014. And before that, he had stints in credit risk and wealth management. He's worked across both the first and second lines of defence, and is currently responsible for all aspects of BBB's risk management framework. We also have Rachel Delhaise, Head of Sustainability at Convex Insurance. Rachel is an experienced insurance executive, having been CRO for a global insurer headquartered in Bermuda, and is also an independent non-executive director. Rachel's bio says that she is, and I have no reason to doubt this, is committed to addressing the challenges of ESG and sustainability within the insurance sector. So we can see if we can get Rachel to expand on that a little bit during the course of the discussion. And last but certainly not least, we have Michelle Leavesley, is a senior risk practitioner working with the group CRO of M&G PLC, a FTSE 100 company. Michelle's role is to act as a change agent in risk, evolving the risk management framework and skill set of risk managers to tackle the range of organizational risks, including sustainability, reputational, behavior, and social media risk. I also noticed that she's senior independent director on Warwickshire County Cricket Club board, which is an interesting little sideline, I have to say. Right. What we'll do is we'll go to Barry first, if that's okay. And Barry, I've just put your slide up. So if you'd like to spend a couple of minutes just talking everyone through your slide, we'll then open up to questions. And as I said, we're trying to make this an interactive discussion. So please do raise questions and get involved.
Cheers, thanks. Thanks very much, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Barry Murphy, and I'm MD within the risk and compliance team at BBB, and I've been there since that sort of setup phase in 2014. For those of you on the call that aren't familiar with the British Business Bank, we are the UK government's economic development bank, dedicated to making finance markets work better for smaller businesses. Now, we largely operate through a network of over 180 delivery partners across our schemes, where we provide wholesale funding or investment to support SMEs' access to finance. We're more recently known for delivering many of the government COVID response schemes for SMEs, such as the bounce back loans, CBILS, or the Future Fund. Though, it's important to say, outside of COVID, we're also the UK's single largest venture capital investor, supporting a range of innovative companies, and sort of almost 10% of our portfolio in the commercial venture arm of British Patient Capital is within clean growth, sustainability, and mobility sectors. Those sort of core programs, they support about £8.5 billion of finance to 95,000 smaller businesses, and the COVID schemes, it's around 80 billion to 1.7 million businesses. And I think in recognition of the huge role that SMEs play in meeting net zero ambitions, this year the bank has explicitly added net zero to its mission, and our mission is to really drive sustainable growth and prosperity across the UK, and to enable that transition to a net zero economy by improving access to finance for smaller businesses. And unfortunately, I think smaller businesses haven't really been a major part of the public debate on how to reach net zero and to support that. In October last year, we published a research report titled "Smaller Businesses and the Transition to Net Zero," and I'll throw a link into the chat, or ask Chris to sort of send that around after the session. I think two key findings there are that smaller businesses often have sort of relatively low emission footprints on an individual level, which is no real surprise. However, collectively, they account for around half of UK business greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, in today's session, you sort of see by the slides, we're talking about financing decisions with a risk angle, but I think it's also helpful to highlight some of the opportunities that our research revealed. Access to finance is a key part of this solution to drive more action, and sort of notably, I think 11% of UK smaller businesses have already accessed external finance to support net zero actions, and our research was showing 22% of the UK smaller business population say they're prepared to access external finance to do so in the next 5 years, and that's just shy of about 1.5 million businesses. So I think there's, that suggests that more SMEs are ready to act if they can find the right product and action to take. And I think a lot of people on this call will touch the SME sector. And of course, there's a lot of focus on net zero, and sometimes the social and governance can get left behind. And the bank BBB isn't just around the E. We've got sort of social initiatives as well around venture capital investing in women code. And on the governance side, obviously we're an arm's length body from government. We have an operational independence with an experienced independent board. So I think, let's say from this intro, sort of highlighted the, there's a significant number of SMEs that are already thinking about access to finance in the coming years and sort of supporting their own net zero ambitions, and that will be higher still, thinking about the S and the G. And it isn't just the smaller SMEs be thinking about this going forward, but large corporates that may need to pivot their supply chains, or individuals thinking about buying electric vehicles or making their homes more energy efficient. So what I've sort of sought to explore in this slide is some of the key challenges that financial institutions, or the delivery partners that we work with, face in ensuring ESG considerations are baked into decisions on lending, and what risks are associated with this. I think that hopefully the slide suggests some areas to prompt discussion, some questions in the chat, or ideas for people on the call to take away and consider how that might be applicable to them and their own firms. And it's by no means a comprehensive list, and won't apply to everyone on the call. As I say, it's more in the lending focus than equity. And indeed, as I say, we're a wholesale funder into the market, and many of these items don't necessarily directly apply to BBB, but I think they'll be the things that our delivery partners are grappling with at the moment, or have sort of addressed in sort of recent times.
So Barry, can I come in with a question at that point? I'll bring the slide down. I thought it was interesting. You were talking about net zero focus. And I was going to ask a question along the lines of, is it the job of financial services organizations to facilitate the sustainability transition? In terms of, I need to be careful. We don't, because this is an open access webinar, we don't want to say anything that's confidential. But in terms of ESG and sustainability, does BBB see that as climate, or does it see it as wider than that? And do you bring in a wider range of things into the lending criteria that you use? I know you use distribution partners, and again, going back to the original part of the question, is it really the job of finance to be driving change, or is it really the job to facilitate that change?
Yeah, well, I think financial services organizations play a huge part in sort of facilitating that transition, and I think that mandate comes from the market itself, really. I think facilitation, the key term here, though, because customers will be driving the transition themselves, and will quite often need access to finance to support that transition. And, I talked about that October research and the long-term expected demand for SMEs, with sort of 22% looking for that external finance. So the demand is there, and that's also likely to grow as more products come to market and companies revisit their prioritization. And indeed, at the start of March, we published our small business finance markets report, and that's just been released. I think this year's report focused on the role of finance in sustainable growth. And there was some more interesting insights there. That I think there was one which sort of talked about 57% of SMEs placing a high priority on becoming more environmentally sustainable in the next 12 months, and sort of key drivers there being sort of around customer expectations, CSR objectives, and then slightly joined there is that sort of reputational or competitive advantage that they're aiming for. So I think, as well as that sort of demand for customers, there's that expectation from investors to improve their own ESG posture, and that's why I think ESG considerations becoming more and more sort of embedded within the FS industry. We're sort of seeing some big announcements. We've got sort of NatWest 100 billion pledge towards climate sustainable finance. Barclays similar, 100 billion. So I do think the finance industry has a mandate from both customers and investors. And then I think you sort of asked about BBB and sort of direction of travel there. We're still developing our own strategy in house as to how we engage with delivery partners, but it isn't just about the E, if that's the key question.
That was really the question. Yeah.
One of the big things that BBB is sort of been supportive is that sort of the S, between it's the the leveling up agenda that we have, through sort of, we've got a lot of sort of regional funds. Then we also, have the startup loans program, for example, where since 2012, when that sort of launched, before it came into BBB, there's 80,000 startup loan recipients, and sort of 31% of those were unemployed at the time of application. That's having a huge impact. Around sort of 40% of applicants were women, and 20% came from Black, Asian, or other ethnic minority backgrounds. So it's really opening up that diversity, and sort of access to finance is really important to us. And BPC, the sort of venture arm, is to say it has the we've adopted the Institutional Limited Partner Association diversity template as part of our own due diligence, and we are picking up a lot of data around the diversity of the investments that we make across a number of our programs. And then, of course, governance. We have a sort of we have a sort of tax policy in and around who we will, the tax structure of delivery partners that we will operate through as well.
Okay, and then building kind of ESG into decision making. I know, as I said before, you work through distribution partners, so they're actually making lending decisions rather than you. But presumably you kind of screen your distribution partners for the kinds of activities that you'd like them to do and not to do. Are people seeing this whole drive towards ESG? Is this kind of wanting to build a better world? Is it self-interest, or is it license to operate? What's behind this, do you think, in terms of where this stuff is going, in terms of the organizations that you work with, the change that they're trying to make? I mean, BBB's own role. I mean, you're driven by government objectives, I know.
Yeah, we're sort of obviously there to support sort of government policy. And I think in the previous roundtables, somebody talked about delivering that sort of that better world as they can, because they might not be able to deliver the best world quite yet. But I do think that, you know, delivery partners, like it's talked about, some of the big banks coming out and making very public pledges around what they plan to do and what they plan to deliver. I think there is that sort of demand from their own customers and their investors.
Okay. If anybody wants to get involved in the discussion, you know, use the hands up function. You see it in the top of the toolbar there, or just raise a question in the chat. That'd be really good to hear from you. Another question, which might be slightly unfair, but we'll ask it anyway. In terms of ESG and obviously focusing on lending to, let me say, you know, positive organisations that will land the ESG agenda. Do you think, is there an element of shooting ourselves in the foot? Because in a global marketplace, there are locations where ESG is less of an issue, and, you know, could we potentially be shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of pushing in that direction, or is it a positive business opportunity?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about sort of geographically, we're obviously focused very much on the UK, and that's where our focus is. But you know, I think
UK companies have to compete globally,
delivery in their other portfolios, you know, and I think that's, we're obviously coming to the fore in sort of questions at the moment. And I know later on sort of Michelle's probably going to talk about sort of reputational risk, but I think particularly, you know, I think there's sort of news if you're like in the airline industry at the moment, with airplanes as security sitting on Russian tarmac, you would be a little worried around, you know, the value of your security.
Well, that's a good question. I suspect the whole kind of current situation is going to come out during the course of this discussion. But, you know, just in terms of the way that organisations have reacted, and what does that tell us about their ESG considerations? So it's bound to come out. Right, Barry, thank you so much for that. That was really, really helpful. Rachel, if you're okay, what we'll do is we'll come to you next. Great. And what I'll do is I will very quickly get your slide up on screen. Bear with me 1 second. Right, there we go. Right. And I'll shut up. There you
go. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, so I work for a company called Convex, which is a kind of moderate-sized commercial specialty insurer based in Bermuda and London and Luxembourg, and it's been going for about 3 years, but it's already quite a reasonable size. So being asked to put the headlines of sustainability in underwriting onto one slide is quite a task. But there's if I just pull out a few things to comment on here. So I think, you know, risk, I mean, everyone in this audience is, you know, been thinking long and hard about the impact of particularly climate change on risk particularly in the last couple of years. But I think certainly as far as we're concerned, I think the real value is is focusing on developing our own bespoke climate scenarios and really sort of digging into that, because what's becoming apparent is that it's not necessarily very obvious. You know, there is a lot of sort of greyness around there's a lot of what we've seen in particularly in our underwritings through, you know, in insurance and reinsurance, and what that world has seen from a property catastrophe perspective in the last couple of years. There's been quite a lot of what we would call loss amplification and trying to get some granularity of detail into to what extent that is climate driven, or is it other aspects such as social inflation or other inflationary factors, or indeed urbanization. So we can see that in some areas that there is an impact of increasing loss costs, but is it down to an increase in the climate related hazard? And you just need to dig into the data and then start building your own scenarios to try to get some better clarity on that. So I think that's definitely an area of focus for us, particularly as far as underwriting is concerned. And then just the sort of broader, you know, the approach to sustainable underwriting. So I think what's where we've developed and increasing our focus is on developing our understanding of clients' ESG and transition trajectories. So the data to help you to enable that is not that obvious. Most of the data sources currently are for investment purposes, but there's still, I think what we've decided is that it's better to start building up data sources as well as we can. But the picture again is complex. Transition is different things in different geographies, and the just transition is an important feature of that. And being able to come up with the information to allow you to form a view in that way, and then also to be able to communicate that is kind of work in progress. And I think globally, I think we're all in the early stages of building data, but I think our view certainly is to sort of just build the information that you do have, capture the data you can, and build up on that. There is one important piece of work on that's going on currently, which is the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, together with an organisation called PCAF, where they're building out a methodology for evaluating, for calculating the emissions, the Scope 3 emissions associated with underwriting. So that work is, I understand, going on currently. A similar thing has been done from the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, again in association with PCAF, for investment-related emissions. So I think once we have a sort of factoring and a methodology for underwriting, that will bring enormous transparency, that will help us all build a emissions profile of our underwriting business. I mean, what does it mean if you're writing the property versus if you're writing the D&O of Shell, say, for example. So I think that would be an important step forward. And then I think, and one of the areas of this that sort of, I guess, excites me more than anything is that there is a lot of opportunity here. I mean, I think we've sort of discussed, or somebody has referred earlier to the just scale of investment in transition. And so just understanding that is really important. It's important from a risk profile perspective, and I think it's important that we as insurers don't see this as this increasing and different risk profile as something to run away from. But I think it's a case of understanding it as well as possible, and then understanding where you can engage. And improving your so I think improving your understanding will lead to opportunities and the potential to lead to developing leadership credentials that may be different from what it's been hitherto. A lot of clients are very, lots of our underwriters tell me that clients, simply all the time now come with lots of ESG material in their presentations. So understanding what that means, I think, will be a real sort of competitive advantage from an opportunistic perspective. So I think that's important. We're all commercial operators, and we're there to be responsible and supportive from as a major player in the financial sector.
Sorry, thank you, Rachel. I'll take your slide down so we can, so it stops dominating the screen. Again, I was going to, it is actually more the same question. I was going to start with, is doing the right thing, an inherently positive strategy that should lead to greater and more sustainable rewards. But in listening to you, I was also kind of it made me think, does a business with a strong ESG or sustainability focus, does that make a better risk in terms of underwriting? Do we know at the moment, are we able to see a positive correlation between those organizations with strong sustainability and ESG credentials, if that's the right word, and insurance risk, or is that not clear yet?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that Howdens have done a bit of work on that. So when they have been doing some work with Parhelion, I know that there was a bit of the paper they published, or they certainly circulated, with that they had done some exploratory work into exactly that, the correlation between, and this is looking at sort of industry, companies with a good ESG profile and profitability from an underwriting perspective. If you had backed, underwritten, and typically they would be sort of blue chip clients, that there is a positive correlation. So, I haven't done that work myself. Instinctively, you would think there seems to be some rationale there, but apparently they have done work and there is that. So, and I have every confidence that work has been well done. So I think that makes sense. But to your question about this, when people, I don't really understand it, frankly, when people talk about this sort of moral question here. To me, it is not. We shouldn't be divorcing, the commercial objectives and is this the moral thing to do? I think that they're tied up. I think that doing the right thing is the commercially sensitive approach and should lead to more sustainable rewards and a more resilient business. I think if you for the following reasons, if your consideration of long-term issues such as climate change and how you offer and how that impacts your firm, I think that's forced you to look on the longer term resilience of your business, and that that has to be a good thing. I think consideration of how your business impacts different stakeholders in society should lead to better rewards. People are more likely to want to work for you. Blue chip companies are more likely to want to trade with you, particularly on these matters, which is becoming increasingly prominent. How you look from a resilience perspective builds confidence with other external stakeholders such as rating agents, regulators, and all of the above makes sense from a shareholder perspective. That is strengthening you as a business. So to me, it is particularly with the wave and the weight of push towards transition that is there. There's no sort of turning away from it now. People take it seriously. So I think you have to be engaged. I think that is absolutely the commercial thing to be doing.
So they are aligned, that we believe that
Absolutely.
there is a commercial justification underneath the whole ESG sustainability agenda. And we're going to get into greenwashing with Shell, so we won't kind of go too far down that route. But presumably if organizations are starting to, presumably this whole sustainability piece will encourage organizations to start thinking longer term. So just extrapolating that, are we going to see a move away from short-term profit maximization into longer-term sustainable and predictable profit flows?
That's that's certainly the direction that people are looking to. But of course, you can't get away from the short-term volatility, and particularly with what's going on in Ukraine. That's adding to there's already quite a lot of, let's say, increase in risk just from the mere scale of transition has got quite a lot of risk associated with it in sort of over different timeframes. But with sort of changing energy demand, that's going to push it as well. So I think people are, I think companies are going to have to play a very careful 3 to 5 year, what does this look like? Because you can't escape the volatility that might bring. So I think that that you've got to have a very clear, you must not lose sight of the immediate. Everyone's got to get a 3 to a 3. Every shareholder in the world is more interested in the 3-year position and 5 year than they are in the 10, 15, even if they are also interested. So I think it's a case of looking at both, but probably to your point, probably with a greater look to the sort of 5 to 10 year, as well as which may not have been looked at before, but that focus on the next kind of 3 years always has to be paramount, because you've got to survive that. You've got to be profitable and resilient in that sort of, particularly so in that shorter period.
And I know you wanted to bring up the energy crisis and how that might impact on transition. I mean, what's the views amongst the people that you speak with in terms of, will the energy crisis accelerate the transition, or will it undermine the transition to a green future? What's the current kind of?
We'll see, won't we? I think it's a slightly changing picture. I think and complex, but I think in some ways, and there's quite a lot of interesting articles about how this might affect it. But I think I think overall it probably will accelerate certainly that shift to renewables. Fortunately, the moving away from a dependency on Russia is the similar goal to moving to renewables, but the sourcing of hydrocarbons in the kind of 3 to 5 years that we will need them is a changing picture. So it is complex, but I think net it should hopefully accelerate towards renewables. But the cost of that, because of course there's a huge need for hydrocarbons in the creation of renewables. The cost of that is going to be significant, and how are we going to afford that with escalating energy costs? So that is it's not going to be easy. It's not making it any easier.
Then presumably the increased energy costs actually is a market driver towards renewables anyway, because it encourages people away from very expensive hydrocarbons.
Exactly. But it's going to cost you to get there.
Yeah, exactly. We had a question come in from Tim Holt. So how might insurance use data to go beyond climate change? So getting to social, labour, political, geopolitical.
That's a really
go ahead.
That's a really interesting question, because the data that you have, what people tend to have in there when people are looking to create sort of risk appetite or their own guidelines and rules around what they're doing is to have sort of exclusions and limitations. And I think what we need to do is have those, but in consideration of certain jurisdictions. So where jurisdictions are on a slower path to transition, you might have a different you'll need different data sources for that. And I think that's one of the issues, is that whilst a lot of the data is for sort of big listed and certainly large firms, it is more difficult to get it for SMEs, etc. But certainly in my world, some of the brokers, a couple of the bigger brokers are starting to do some work in trying to engage with their clients to get a sort of standardized format of ESG profiling of the client. So I think that's an area where we need to build up, is to get a greater breadth of companies for whom we can get ESG information. But also, I think, just as companies yourself, just taking engaging and understanding them and finding a way to consume that information in your own data reserves.
Interesting phrase, ESG profiling. I guess that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Right. At that point, I think, if you don't mind, we'll bring Michelle into the conversation. Michelle, I'll let you start, and when you want me to put the slide on the screen, you just give me the nod.
Thanks, Chris. So hi all. I'm Michelle Leavesley, as Chris mentioned, Director of Organisational Risk at M&G plc. Yes, I report to the CRO and have delegated responsibility for the management and oversight of sustainability risk across the 3 lines of defence. I'm here today as a risk professional, so just the rider representing my own thoughts and views. So therefore, views expressed today are not necessarily the view of my employer. But at M&G, we do live our values of inspiration and collaboration. So I'm very happy to share whatever practical experience I have to the table today to hopefully help and inspire others tackling these challenging issues on ESG and sustainability. So just thought it'd be just quickly address the elephant in the room or on the online universe. Yes, you did hear correctly. My title is organisational risk, not operational risk. It's something I'm asked about quite a lot. People are quite curious about it. And it is relatively new, and it focuses on how a business operates. It's I'd describe it as a hybrid of strategic transformation, people, behaviours and communication, and possibly links to some of the things that Barry and Rachel have mentioned already. Because how we behave and communicate is so important in this area. And it seems obvious, really, but we can have the best operational processes in the world, but if we don't behave and act in a consistent and appropriate way in line with our mission, vision and values, we will be called out by stakeholders, fall foul of misconceptions, or worse, land ourselves in trouble with, yes, greenwashing. I find it a useful litmus test to ask people, what they do for a living. So, I might say Susan, Jonathan, Andrea, I'm just picking on the names I can see, so what do you do for a living? And Sometimes people default, or often people default to the what. You know, I work in insurance, I'm an asset manager, I work in banking. There aren't many people that you would meet who talk about the how. You know, I work for a firm who wants to make a difference in people's lives, so we help them manage their savings in a way that creates a more positive future for themselves and the planet, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting litmus test in the how versus the what. And let's face it, what's more engaging in respect of building a relationship. So I guess this is the link to my background is in commercial marketing rather than risk. And you're going to potentially see more people like me entering into the risk management profession. Why? Because we're classically trained in looking at business through the eyes of stakeholders. Some might call it outside in, albeit a very important group. The employee has a foot both internal and external. So watch the space on that. As a marketeer, you know, my exams are a long time ago, but, you know, basics in marketing are about identifying, anticipating, and satisfying customers' needs profitably. And the same applies for ESG, and therefore we must identify, anticipate, and satisfy a range of stakeholders on ESG, but do so profitably, because let's not forget, we must be sustainable too. So I believe our license to operate exists in an environment where our customers, our employees and supply chain have moved on from transactional engagement to wanting to build relationships with people. They want to know who they're doing business with, working for, partnering, and this is a really important part of the messages I want to leave today. The recent reputation dividend report, I know many of you are aware of the report 2021, very much reinforces this. So reputation, as Barry alluded to, reputation now accounts for over a third of the combined market capitalisation of the FTSE 350. That's 34%, £823 billion of shareholder value. And the reputation contribution was up by 8%. Many suspect this is as a result of working from home, the pandemic, how companies have treated their employees and how they've maintained their engagement with customers through this period. So having given you the sell on why the corporate position matters, if Chris could press the button on my slide, I just wanted to pick up 5 bullet points, which hopefully you can see them across the middle there. So from left to right, 5 key considerations in terms of looking at the integration of ESG from a top-down corporate position. Firstly, I kick off with culture on the left. So Chris mentioned my other universe in sport, and I find that intrinsically people who work in sport are wired to make decisions that naturally support an ESG environment. They understand that sport is the medium for change, that it changes people's lives in a range of ways, and they think about the impact they will have on local communities and the people they serve. In Edgbaston, we ran a vaccine clinic, we ran a testing centre, a food bank, all those kind of things through the pandemic to support the local community. It's second nature. But people in sport have had to adapt because they don't have mega bucks. It relies on lots of goodwill. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make here, it's instinctive. There's no 3 lines of defence. There's no strategy or CRO. So how do we bottle that and make it a default position across the businesses that we serve? The second point around strategy. So second bullet along. Strategy should guide our decisions, of course, and I know people on this line are very strategic. I can see their names. The challenge I see practically is there are so many areas. How do we prioritise? But we must prioritise, because linking back to the how we do business, people must know, our stakeholders must know what it is that we are championing, and we must be honest and transparent. We must choose the ESG issues that we can genuinely influence and champion. One recent example was on the Facebook boycott, and I won't do a hands up on how many people got involved in that, but lots of businesses made public statements about withdrawing their advertising from Facebook, and they were going to make a stand against Facebook. But actually, it was found that a lot of that was really tokenistic. A number of financial services firms actually weren't spending, they weren't investing a lot in advertising. So again, it was a lot of talk rather than walk. It wasn't a meaningful stand. And I guess our resources are not limitless, and we do tend to default to some of the same categories. And I'm very aware, as you know, UN SDGs, there are 17. Yet collectively we tend to default to the same buckets, primarily climate. And I had an interesting experience at a recent CRO forum. There were 2 workshops, one on climate and one on financial inclusion. And Barry gave us some great examples of financial inclusion. And the climate change was packed, and only 4 people attended the financial inclusion webinar. And yet I look at the TV today and, you know, I reflect on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People need food and shelter. You know, we're seeing this play out for ourselves. So strategic, important, let's prioritize, but let's also do less, but more impactfully and with what we do. The 3 others, so stakeholder, I was just going to say on the middle, if you haven't come across the Better Business Act or it's not on your radar, I would really encourage you to look it up, particularly as we head towards a corporate governance vote in April. And, you know, let's face it, for those of us listed, it is the rule book by which we abide, and, you know, comply or explain. And there is a shift from shareholder to stakeholder. It's significant. You know, section 172 of our annual reports, I have the joy of oversight of annual reporting, but that section 172 is very, very telling about firms, and it really highlights the extent to which firms are putting the stakeholder at the heart of their decision making in these areas. And my asset management colleagues will spend a lot of time talking about clients and mandates, and of course we have a duty of care to transition responsibly. But we also need to consider the wider range of stakeholders, such as employees, in our consideration. And then finally, balance and ability and confidence. So balance, I do feel that the people who are working in this space are very stressed, working crazy hours to satisfy the regulatory requirements, satisfy ratings agencies, reporting. It is immense. So we do need to be effective leaders, effective on our decision making, do the right things at the right time, and to set ourselves up for success. And in a risk environment, having been responsible for the design and implementation of a number of new policies, I think we need to be practical. So things like road testing new policies. So rather than launching and starting breaching lots of people who are brand new to some of this, that we do have an educational approach in how we adopt risk management. Which leads neatly on to the final point around ability and confidence. I think that, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about education, but do we practice what we preach? None of us are experts. People who say they're experts can't possibly be. There are so many characteristics around ESG. We need to work as a team. We need to pull in a range of different skill sets, and there are complex dependencies, and we need to get into a comfortable space around decision making on ESG, and therefore we must adapt. And a great example, obviously I've worked a lot in terms of investment performance risk, and people will focus in naturally, as they've always done, on financial performance, but are just not as confident on areas of non-financial, and considering, as I say, the alignment in terms of our mission, vision, values, our purpose, all the things I've just referenced is going to be really important moving forward. So my takeaways, to summarise, would think about the how over the what, check the strategy is aligning purposefully, think about stakeholders, check that you're getting the right balance, and trying to support people for the future. So they're my 5, and I really look forward to questions.
So thank you, Michelle. I think what comes through strongly there is that this is all big ticket stuff. This is not simple checkbox, easy to do. This involves a lot of thought, a lot of consensus, a lot of hard questions for the boards and senior teams to consider and come to a kind of align on. Which brings me to, given that this is a risk-focused discussion, what is the role of the CRO in all of this? What is the role of the CRO in trying to get the organisation aligned around what they're going to do in the sustainability ESG space?
I think it's such a good question, Chris, and you know, please let's share some ideas from the floor on this. I think a lot depends on the size of the business. And we have a lot of debates at the forums that I attend around the role of the CRO versus the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer. And I'm very aware that dependent on the size of your business, in my business, there's likely to be, I guess I'm delegated the responsibility from the CRO to be the Chief Sustainability Officer and, flag anything that may be of concern to himself and the risk committee. But in other businesses, I see the CRO and the Chief Sustainability Officer being one and the same. And I know we've got some great examples. Alex Heinsohn, probably my guru in respect of combining those two areas. So I think, again, it comes back to what is the business? What is the purpose, the strategy for sustainability? So I guess that's sort of my rider, but there are three key areas I would see. The first is around that culture piece. You can tell I'm pretty passionate about creating the right decision-making environment for this, and that diverse new skills, engaging, helping people on this journey and helping people see that we can't control everything. We have to get much better in how we manage risk from the outside in perspective and look, to turn that lens on ourselves and see what others see, because we have a lot of blind spots in this space. So that's a lot of, so I think the CRO needs to ensure that culture, we look at culture dashboards, we look at the training, that there's a whole array of areas that the CRO would get involved in a larger business, and I think even more so in smaller. I think process, so the risk management framework, we've done a lot of work on that. Some of my colleagues on this line, I know have been in other forums with me where we've talked about what needs to evolve on the risk management framework. I think historically, some firms launched with an independent sustainability strategy. Everything was sort of treated as an office down the corridor rather than front and center. It was all, there was somebody with sustainability titles somewhere in the risk department, and that was their job. We now know for this to succeed, it has to be everybody's responsibility. But we do have to adapt that risk management framework to, create space for this new headspace around organisational risks. Clearly, new policies. We've launched a number of new policies. I also, and this is a sort of a pet kind of flag for me, but our risk management tools need to evolve, and I won't name names for reputational reasons, but we all seem to default to some of the same sort of systems, and those systems are very keen to close incidents, close issues and actions. We incentivize risk teams to close things, and in this space there's something called incubation, and things sit with us, and they might not be an issue that we can close. It might be something that undermines trust over a short period of time or a long period of time. So I think those processes, and then finally the independent check and challenge. Clearly as the CRO you've got that independence and that ability to stand back, and I think that's probably been one of our biggest challenges. Is we all have personal agendas on this as well as the corporate agendas, and I think sometimes it's too, I think I saw something with 172 ESG issues that any one of us could pick up, and from animal welfare through to climate change, and I think there's just that independence, that scrutiny in that area is really important.
It's a really interesting point about that independence and objectivity. So this is the Risk Coalition's raising the bar guidance. We emphasise independence and objectivity of the CRO and the risk team, but a lot of the ESG related issues can become quite personal in terms
Absolutely.
of you might. So how does a CRO ensure that they leave their bias at the door, that the board continues to trust their perspective and gives them airtime when some of these issues can be quite, as I said, everyone has a view, or is that the approach? Everyone has a view.
So I guess I'm going to come back again to strategy and priorities. So everybody does have a view, but we have to choose what we're going to get behind and what we're going to support. So we're clearly selecting things like climate, diversity and inclusion are key ticket items for firms, But I think you have to be really clear about what's in scope and what's out of scope. And that's really important from a resourcing perspective, from a focus perspective. And I suppose we saw it around COP26, didn't we? That we saw people jumping on bandwagon. They sort of say their strategy was, their focus was on a certain area, and then you'd see firms signing up to new memberships, new charters, new standards, and jumping on bandwagons. And that's fine if they can authentically deliver on that. But in the greenwashing arena, we have to be careful and ensure that we are delivering on those promises, because as those figures from the reputation dividend shows, when you've got Experian, who have got nearly 50% market capitalization dependent on reputation, they cannot afford to put a foot wrong on that. So yeah.
And does the whole ESG sustainability topic open organizations up to pressure groups? And again, how do they deal with it? So let's just take the Russian thing at the moment. I mean, we saw some organizations withdraw from Russia really quickly ahead of government decisions. Other organizations have been, kicking and screaming before they finally leave, and probably only because they've realized the bulk of their business is being damaged elsewhere. So again, any tips for organizations in terms of the whole pressure group thing? So to give you an example, I used to work with an organization, pharmaceutical organization, and they lost a number of independent non-executive directors when animal rights protesters turned up on doorsteps unexpectedly, and that really focused their minds as a board. Lost a number of board members, but actually the work they were doing was very, very important work that benefited humankind. So where are we with this? Does it mean that we're subject to influence?
So from an activism perspective, we see activism in a number of ways, and actually some of the most interesting activism comes from within. So our employees, and actually if you are living and breathing ESG and you care about people and you support your tribe, then actually listening to the areas and concerns that they have is really important. And some of the activism of internal employees, I think it's a really important that we listen to some of the issues and concerns they have. There's also something around effective communication on that, because perception is reality, and sometimes, especially on the greenwashing piece, where firms have inappropriately been called for greenwashing when actually they weren't, but the perception was that they were greenwashing. And that's really, you feel for those firms, because they were doing good in the world, but actually they weren't communicating how they were doing it in an effective way, and so they've been called out. The activism from a security perspective concerns me. So there is a lot of third-party tools. We're asked to complete a lot of surveys on all sorts of range of ESG issues, and we have heard of examples where some of that information has been leaked, has been posted, and obviously some of this is people are still working out their approach. And again, from a communication perspective, the trust from that being leaked into the domain, it can be very damaging for a firm. So I think from an activism perspective, don't just assume it's the people who are camped outside the office door. Think more broadly about your stakeholder groups and where activism is likely to land. And potentially, I think the ratings agencies probably influence the behavioural risk more in respect of, I see firms chasing their A+. But actually, again, if we're going to be confident about our abilities on our strategy, be authentic, then we should be comfortable in where we genuinely sit on ratings, as long as we have plans to address some of our shortcomings. So I think that can influence the behavioural around, communication and over-promising and some of the issues that are coming to the forefront now in respect of greenwashing.
A whole bunch of questions come to mind, but just I'm going to go to the culture piece, because you said creating the right environment is really important. Now, the Risk Coalition, we have this isn't an advert, by the way. The Risk Coalition, we have a tool called Gabby, which people can use to assess themselves against raising the bar, the guidance. But the one area in terms of the benchmark that Gabby demonstrates is organisations across the board are not very good at risk culture. It's the one area of the summary chart which is glowing yellow. So it's an area where risk functions have historically probably not done very much, and it's an area where first and third lines have probably not done very much. But it is hugely important for all the reasons that you've just mentioned. So again, is this an area where the CRO, where the risk function should be paying more attention in terms of organisation cultural risk culture, and how that can impact organisation performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you mentioned at the beginning, Michelle's a change agent in risk. I was brought in specifically to tackle the issues around the perception of the risk department from a point of view of, we've got to be seen as the seatbelt. We help the business go faster, safer, land a strategy safely, and make the business more successful from a risk perspective, but then also empower every person within the business to understand their roles and responsibilities around risk. It's great to work for a firm that has values of keep it simple, and I think that's something that perhaps in the past risk haven't done. Is we've surrounded it in mystery and from a technical perspective, we need to speak a language that engages a whole range of people, and particularly I rely on the first line. I rely on individuals to flag reputational issues in and around ESG, because we're all learning together. So that creating that environment where people, yes, we are three lines of defence, but people don't feel, people feel empowered to come forward to say, I'm really worried about this. What is this? Should we worry about this? And I love that, because from that, I find all sorts of risks that we never focused on before, whether it's the customer fraud on social media, which is a new issue that we're really, all of us are grappling with. Through to some of the barriers to success in and around the activism piece. It's a fascinating area, but I'm conscious we've only got an hour, so yeah.
I know, and we are pretty much out of time. I think we've got a minute or so. I mean, if there are any final questions, I'm just looking in the chat box. No, I don't. I think we've probably. No, hang on, there's one from Neil here. Products obviously vary across a range of shades of green. How quickly do you hope that these shades would darken for mainstream core products as opposed to focused products? I don't know whether you want to try and answer that or not.
I'm not sure. Is that one for me or is that for Rachel?
I don't know. I think just broadly, anybody want to come in on that one, or Rachel?
I guess one of the front, you're starting to sort of see it with the pledges certainly on the SME lending front, which perhaps you're sort of thinking about your core. I do think it is. We're going to sort of see that over time. But I talked about some of the challenges. I think one of the big challenge around sort of product development is data, depending on your sort of customer base. I think there's lots of data for the big corporates, but the smaller you get, the more and more challenging it becomes. And particularly if you've got to make decisions based on data. And
Rachel's making exactly the point about data as well. And that's really crucial for going forward to making this whole thing kind of hang together and work, particularly in terms of sharing information about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Chris, can I just make one final comment? Not data, but just on Michelle's point about culture. I think what's great is I think ESG is a bit of a gift for risk culture, because it just like risk, it's enterprise level, and people, and in terms of engaging people and values across the business, it does get people invested, and it touches lots of things. It touches risk. It does a sort of underwriting risk. It touches stakeholder. It touches investments. It touches everything. So I think it's a great way to really help underpin culture. I think it's a risk aware, not just a risk awareness, but a sort of a values. Bringing the values of the firm together. So I think it's I think ESG is fantastic. It's a real asset, frankly, that people can use within the business from that perspective.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a great point to finish on. We're out of time. I'd like to thank my panel, Barry, Michelle, Rachel, great contributions. Thanks for the questions from the audience as well. I'll be sharing the slide on LinkedIn and probably via email for those that signed up and shared their email, so you'll have a copy of the slides. There's some LinkedIn connections for you to click on so you can see people's bios, so you don't need to go searching for them. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your time. Hopefully that was an interesting discussion. It was for me. I certainly learned something today, which is always a good thing. And I would just wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks very
Chris.
much, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye. Bye, everyone.